Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling completely confused? Not just upset, but genuinely questioning your own memory, your own perception. Maybe you confronted them about something that hurt you, something they said, something they did, and suddenly the conversation turned. They told you that you were overreacting, too sensitive, imagining things, misremembering. And after a while, you started wondering, am I the problem here? If you've ever felt like someone slowly made you doubt your own reality, you may have experienced one of the most powerful manipulation tactics used by narcissists. It's called gaslighting. And today we're going to break down exactly how it works and why it can make even strong, intelligent people question their own sanity. Gaslighting rarely starts in obvious ways. In the beginning, the relationship may feel deeply validating. The narcissist might admire you, compliment you, make you feel uniquely understood. But over time, subtle contradictions begin appearing. You remember a conversation one way, they remember it another way. You recall something they said, they insist it never happened. And the first few times, you give them the benefit of the doubt. Because relationships involve misunderstandings sometimes. But the pattern slowly grows until one day you notice something disturbing. Your confidence in your own perception is starting to disappear. Gaslighting works because it attacks something fundamental to human stability, our sense of reality. When two people experience the same moment but remember it differently, the brain naturally tries to resolve the contradiction. But when one person repeatedly denies events, emotions, or conversations that clearly happened, the brain experiences cognitive conflict, and that conflict creates psychological instability. The mind starts searching for an explanation, and unfortunately, many victims arrive at the same conclusion. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I'm remembering wrong. But gaslighting doesn't only happen through denial. It often includes several subtle behaviors: rewriting past conversations, minimizing your emotions, mocking your reactions, changing the story when confronted, and slowly creating an environment where your perception becomes unreliable. For example, you say, "You said that yesterday." They respond, "I never said that. You're imagining things." Or you say, "That really hurt me." And they respond, "You're always too sensitive." Over time, the message becomes clear. Your reality is wrong. Their reality is the only one that counts. This manipulation has a powerful effect on the nervous system. When your brain repeatedly receives contradictory information from someone you trust, it begins losing confidence in its own interpretation of events. Stress hormones increase. Your mind becomes hyper alert. You begin double-checking conversations, replaying memories, searching for confirmation. And the narcissists may use this confusion to strengthen their control. Because when someone doubts their own perception, they become easier to influence. Gaslighting also contributes to the development of trauma bonds. Because the same person who destabilizes your reality may occasionally restore it. They might suddenly act supportive, understanding, affectionate, and that emotional relief can feel incredibly powerful. Because for a moment, the confusion disappears. You feel validated again, and that validation becomes deeply addictive. But the cycle eventually returns. Doubt, confusion, reassurance, then doubt again. Many survivors ask themselves the same painful question later. How did I not see this earlier? But intelligence doesn't protect people from gaslighting, because gaslighting doesn't work through logic. It works through emotional trust. We naturally believe the people closest to us. We assume good intentions. We try to resolve misunderstandings. And narcissistic personalities often exploit that goodwill. Recovery often begins with a single realization. Your perception was never the problem. The problem was a constant rewriting of reality. Many survivors begin regaining clarity when they start documenting interactions, writing things down, trusting their emotional reactions, seeking outside perspectives, and slowly rebuilding trust in their own experience. Healing from gaslighting also involves reconnecting with your nervous system. Practices that restore internal stability become important. Sleep, movement, sunlight, nutrient-rich food, supportive communities. Because the mind becomes clearer when the body feels safe again. And once clarity returns, something remarkable often happens. The confusion that once felt overwhelming suddenly becomes understandable. Not because the past changed, but because you finally see the pattern. The moment you recognize gaslighting for what it was, something powerful happens. The narrative shifts, but something else often happens after this realization. And many survivors are not prepared for it, because when the fog of gaslighting finally begins to lift, clarity does not always feel peaceful at first. Sometimes it feels overwhelming. Memories start rearranging themselves. Conversations that once seemed confusing suddenly become painfully clear. Moments where you blamed yourself begin to look very different. You may replay situations in your mind and realize that your instincts were right all along. That the discomfort you felt was not irrational. That the confusion was not because you were overly emotional, but because someone was actively destabilizing your sense of reality. And this stage can be emotionally intense, not because you are moving backwards, but because your mind is finally processing what it could not safely process before. When someone lives inside gaslighting for long periods of time, the brain often suppresses certain conclusions. It delays recognition, because accepting the truth too early might threaten the attachment to the relationship. And human beings are wired to preserve attachment whenever possible, especially when deep emotional bonds are involved. So the brain sometimes chooses confusion over clarity, because confusion allows the relationship to continue. Clarity, on the other hand, forces difficult decisions. But once clarity arrives, something begins shifting internally. Your emotional compass slowly starts recalibrating. At first, it may feel subtle. You begin trusting smaller reactions again. If something feels off in a conversation, you notice it sooner. If someone dismisses your feelings, you recognize the discomfort faster. Instead of immediately assuming you misunderstood, you pause, you observe, you reflect, and those pauses are powerful because they restore something gaslighting tries to take away: your internal authority. Gaslighting works by transferring authority over reality from you to someone else. The narcissist becomes the interpreter of events, the judge of emotions, the one who decides what is real and what is exaggerated. But recovery gradually returns that authority to where it always belonged, inside you. This doesn't mean every memory will become perfectly clear. Human perception is always imperfect. But healthy relationships allow room for two perspectives to exist. Gaslighting removes that space entirely. It replaces dialogue with domination. And recognizing that difference can transform how you approach relationships moving forward. Many survivors notice that after experiencing gaslighting, they become far more attentive to certain behaviors. Not in a paranoid way, but in a discerning way. They notice when someone refuses accountability, when someone consistently reframes conversations to avoid responsibility, when someone minimizes emotions instead of acknowledging them. These signals become easier to recognize because your nervous system has already learned their impact. And something else begins to change too. Your tolerance for confusion decreases. In the past, you may have spent hours trying to decode someone else's behavior, trying to understand contradictions, trying to reconcile words and actions that didn't match. But over time, survivors often develop a new principle for relationships. Clarity becomes a form of safety. When communication is clear, respectful, and consistent, the nervous system relaxes. When communication is evasive or manipulative, the body notices quickly. And instead of chasing explanations, you start honoring those signals. Because healing from gaslighting is not just about understanding the past. It's about building a future where your perception no longer needs constant validation from someone else. A future where your emotions are not treated as problems to be corrected, but as information to be understood. And one of the most empowering moments in recovery happens quietly. There is no dramatic confrontation, no final conversation. Just a moment when you realize something simple but profound. You trust yourself again. You trust the way your mind interprets situations. You trust your emotional reactions. You trust the boundaries you set. And that trust becomes the foundation for every relationship that follows. Because once someone reconnects with their own perception, manipulation loses its power. Gaslighting depends on uncertainty. It depends on self-doubt. It depends on the constant need for external validation. But when those foundations disappear, the entire structure collapses. And what remains is something far stronger than the confusion that once existed. Self-trust. The quiet confidence that your experience matters, that your perception deserves respect, and that any relationship requiring you to abandon that truth was never healthy to begin with. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Why did someone need to distort reality to maintain control?" And that question opens the door to a deeper kind of freedom. If you've ever experienced gaslighting in a relationship, comment below. What was the moment you realized something wasn't right? Your story might help someone else recognize the pattern sooner. And if you're rebuilding your life after narcissistic abuse, subscribe. You survived the relationship. Here, we help you survive it too.